All right. Good afternoon. This meeting is in fact being recorded. For those of you that don't know, my name is Rebecca. I am the Director of Marketing and the Volunteer Coordinator at WildCare. I am also sort of Stephanie's right-hand gal when we do these things. I do the fun intro and the fun outro at the end, so I will field your questions as we go along. It is my job to remind you that we sort of live and die by your donations. So thank you everyone that contributed to tonight's talk. If you did not give a donation or you'd like to give a little bit more after you see this, because it's going to be so fantastic, you can always log on to our Facebook or onto wildcarecapecod.org. I like to tell people that every $5 actually does matter, and it really does at WildCare. $5 can actually mean the difference between life and death. So thank you for contributing your $5 and dollars. I saw a lot of people gave more than that, and we are very, very grateful. If you enjoyed tonight's talk, we are recording it. It will be on our YouTube channel. So because you were an attendee, you'll be able to watch it again and again as many times as you want. I know I've watched previous ones more than once and learned stuff that I forgot she even said. So if you'd like to go back and watch it, you can always check it out on our YouTube channel. We have one more of these Wild Wednesday talks next Wednesday. A gentleman named Doug Smith from Sensitech is going to be talking to us about rat birth control. Called Contrapest. I am fascinated. I cannot wait to hear how this works, what the game plan is. So if you'd like to join us for that, you can always sign up through Eventbrite, same place you signed up for this talk. So I am going to turn it over to our fearless leader, our esteemed executive director and bird aficionado extraordinaire, Stephanie Ellis.
Oh my goodness, that's quite the introduction. Thank you, Rebecca.
You are very welcome.
I am going to share my screen. Okay, Rebecca, can you see this and hear me? Awesome. And everyone's on mute. Okay, that's great. So thank you for joining me. This is, I think, my most favorite topic other than talking about baby mice. We're going to talk about bird eggs. This is an American robin. It looks like a male, bright red breast. And then these are the quintessential American robin nest. And we are going to get right into it. So I'm going to talk about avian reproductive anatomy, how the egg is actually formed, how the chick develops within the egg, how the chicks hatch, and a little bit more. So the first thing that I want to talk about is this is what the reproductive anatomy looks like in a pigeon. And so it's interesting, birds only have one ovary. And the reason for that is because birds are flighted and they need to be as buoyant as possible. And having two ovaries would be cumbersome because it would add weight, but it would also create the problem of, imagine trying to lay two eggs simultaneously. Because if they had two ovaries, they would need to have two oviducts. So you can see here, they have one ovary, they have one oviduct. This is where the egg forms and passes down before it is laid. And we're going to talk all about this. And so I just think, it's a fascinating piece of bird anatomy that most people are not familiar with. When eggs develop, they basically, the ovary has these ripe follicles, which basically get fertilized here and then pop out into the top of the oviduct. And then they go through this 24, if not more, hour process of developing. Another interesting thing that most people don't know about is that eggs actually, they are laid. They come out of the same exact place where birds reproduce. So bird sex, they come out of the same place where birds go to the bathroom. And that is referred to as the cloaca. And we will talk about that in more detail. When a female bird is in breeding condition, her ovary swells and gets ready for these tiny little eggs to be fertilized. It's fascinating. And so here, I apologize for the graphic photo if you guys have just eaten dinner or are going to, but this is what an adult female bird's reproductive anatomy actually looks like. So this was a red-tailed hawk. Unfortunately, this bird did not survive. And so I did a necropsy and learned that this bird was a female. and she was coming into breeding condition. So her ovary is here, and you can see, as I mentioned, those little follicles that begin to ripen, they would become fertilized here, and then one by one make their way down the oviduct, which you cannot see here, and the egg development process would begin. So just pretty fascinating to see. And of course, this is enlarged, but those little follicles are tiny, tiny, tiny. It looks like a miniature cluster of grapes. And then the male avian reproductive tract is equally as fascinating. Here is a male pigeon strutting his stuff and the female running away, you know, sort of often resembles human life. I love this photo. And so interestingly, male birds, they also, they have testes, and their testes increase in size when they are in breeding condition. And when I say in breeding condition, what I'm referring to is birds are stimulated to breed because of many external factors. The main one being photoperiod, the length of daylight in a day. And so we all know in the spring, we rejoice, we have the changing of the clocks, the days are longer. And so birds are responding to the longer days with hormones that then tell them, okay, it's time to start breeding, time to start nest building, and their gonads enlarge. So it shows here a pigeon's breeding testes, you know, enlarges over 100 times its non-breeding status. And so birds, so they have a testes, and this is where the sperm is produced, but the sperm is not held there. And this is because, think about a bird's body. Birds have a really high body temperature, you know, so internally, depending on the species, it could be 108 degrees, and that would be preclusive to sperm surviving. It would die in those high temperatures. Oops. So instead, the sperm is produced here, up by the kidneys in the bird's body, but then it's transferred through a seminal vesicle down to the cloaca. Remember, I was saying the cloaca is where eggs are laid for the female. It's where poop is deposited. There's a lot going on down there. The males actually store the sperm in the cloaca because the body temperature there, you know, it's like as external as it possibly can be. So the body temperature is cooler there, and the sperm can actually survive. I hope that makes sense. So just really, really cool. And something I forgot to show you on the female is, you know, birds evolved from reptiles millions of years ago. And so when they were reptiles, they did have two oviducts. As they became flighted and more buoyant, they lost that right oviduct and they only have a left oviduct. Kind of cool. Probably more anatomy than you ever wanted to know, but it's really, really fascinating. And so I have here, what about a bladder? So I keep saying birds poop from their cloaca, but I haven't mentioned any urine. Birds do not have a bladder. They do not produce urine like we do. The urine that we produce has ammonia. It can reach toxic levels in the body, which we will explain. And also urine takes a lot of water to flush it out of the system. And birds just can't, you know, they can't be loading up on water all the time because they need to be buoyant. So no living birds have bladders. Instead, they secrete this non-toxic pasty substance from the kidneys, and it's in like crystal form. So when you go out to your car window and you see poop with all the white around it, the white is the urates. So that is basically their urine. It's uric acid crystals. And the body can store that for short periods of time. I'll explain why this is important when we talk about the chick developing within the egg. And then finally, I wanted to say vasectomy. It's so interesting, but some people vasectomize their roosters to get them to stop crowing. It may work temporarily, but birds are still able to have hormones circulating through their system that allows them to crow. but some people do vasectomize their roosters. Okay, so I was talking about the seminal vesicle and how birds need to store sperm in this vesicle because it's lower in body temperature in that area. And so this is what it looks like. This is a bird's abdomen, just to give you reference. And this is the cloaca where they go to the bathroom from. But look at this, see how it's all swollen? You might see that and say, oh my God, that bird has a problem, it has a tumor. No, this is a bird, this is a male who's holding a whole lot of sperm. So to us, that's important because if we had a bird that showed this, we'd know he's in breeding condition. There might be eggs. We need to get this bird back out into the wild as soon as possible. So it's kind of cool. So that is not abnormal to see during the breeding season. Okay, so how do they do it? I love this slide. I hope there are no children on this program. Pornithology is the perfect term for this. So we're going to now talk about bird sex. I love this photo. These are common terns reproducing. And basically what happens is that cloaca that I keep talking about, it basically everts, and the birds literally come together with their cloacas, and there is a transfer of sperm. Because remember, that male, his testes are like right near the cloaca. So quick cloacal kiss is what they call it, and it's done. So you might see he'll step on her back. Well, the first thing he'll do is offer her a bunch of fish and wave them back and forth. And then as soon as she accepts one, that's his key that he can jump on her back, and then they're done. Like, you don't even have a chance to blink your eyes and they're already finished copulating. But it's very cool to see. And many species have elaborate courtship displays. Terns happen to be one of them. There's usually a food offering and a little bit of a dance. And then, and then birds have different ways of having sex. Most birds do that cloacal kiss, quick interaction. And some birds are so cute about it. Look at this, piping plover rhymes with lover for a reason, right? Because they're absolutely adorable. But then some birds are actually well endowed, and they have what's called a phallus. And it's so weird in the bird world. I keep telling you that birds, they need to be buoyant. They can't have extra things. Okay, so then why would some birds have evolved these penises that we refer to as a phallus? Well, for one, the waterfowl have penises, and that is because waterfowl generally mate in the water. And imagine if you're in the water and you do this, that transfer of sperm might not take place as efficiently because you're in the water. So waterfowl, ducks and geese and swans, they've actually evolved a penis so that the female can be penetrated and they have that transfer of sperm underwater. It's not really a penis. It's this corkscrew shaped. I wanted to spare you by not putting duck penises on this program, but it's sort of a corkscrew shaped elongation of the cloaca that they use to penetrate the female. And so what about ostriches? They have the longest phallus in the bird world, 15.7 inches when erect and bright red. I have to say, I would enjoy seeing that because that's got to be a sight to see. And you think, okay, so why do they have a phallus? They don't breed underwater. Other birds that have phalluses are promiscuous species. They need to get the job done, and they need to get it done quickly, and they need to be efficient. And ostriches happen to be promiscuous. And so these guys have a phallus and they win the award for the largest phallus. It's pretty cool. Pretty amazing. Okay, so here's two pigeons in love engaging in probably pre-copulatory preening. That's always fun to watch. And so let's talk about the oviduct and the actual formation of eggs. There's a lot of things that happens in the production of an egg. So I was saying to you that birds have one ovary, and then they have all these tiny little follicles. These follicles contain a yolk as we know it. Your rich yellow, orange bird yolks. Okay, and then Sperm is stored at the top of the oviduct. And when a bird comes into breeding condition, a ripe ovum will pop out into this section and become fertilized. And then, so what happens is the ovum's released into the oviduct, and then it's fertilized, and then it starts moving down into what's called the magnum region. And this usually takes place over a period of about 3 hours. It really depends on the species, but most birds, it takes them 24 hours to complete an egg and lay it. There are exceptions, but like your typical chicken egg, chickadee egg, swan egg, 24 hours. Okay, so after it goes into the magnum area and receives a coating of albumin. And albumin is, if you crack open your chicken egg, you see some clear liquidy portions of the egg and also some white portion of the egg. Oops. And that is the albumin. And I'll explain what that does next. The bird goes into the isthmus region, and it starts to receive its shell membranes. So now we're starting to see, this would be, if it came out of the bird from the isthmus region, it would look like an egg with a yolk, except it wouldn't have the hard shell. It would just be membranes. Okay, so it passes through that area, and then it finally gets to the uterus region. And here is where the egg spends most of its time. And this is because the egg is turning, it's receiving all of its calcified eggshell, it's receiving pigment. And by the way, pigment is deposited, the bird has glands in this uterus region that are being squirted out onto the egg. And that's what gives it its characteristic color, splotches, scrawls. Okay. And what determines that is genetics. So, birds typically, they've evolved to have eggs that match their landscapes. Eggs that don't match your landscape mean less chicks that hatch and survive. So evolution favors a specific look and shape to an egg. So it's all genetic and a little bit of diet. So anyway, this part of the egg development process takes about 20 hours, and a bird that produces an egg in about 24 hours. It's really, really fascinating. And the markings depend on how quickly or slowly the egg is moving. So, you might see little dots on an egg because it moved rapidly and the pigment squirted out, and eggs that move slowly often get this scrawling mark of the pigment being drawn out. And of course, I'm grossly oversimplifying it. It's a really fascinating process. And you've probably, if you eat eggs at home, I'm sure you've cracked open an egg and you've had an egg with 2 yolks in it. And that is just, it's like an ovulation glitch, where, remember that ovary and the ovum pop out? Well, 2 popped out instead of 1. So 2 ovum popped out. They both contained yolks. They both went through the same process at the same time and received 1 eggshell. Does that make sense? So it's kind of cool. And there's nothing wrong with that chicken that just had a little glitch. You also might see sometimes a little blood spot in your egg, and that is nothing. That's just simply, it's ovulation related usually, and it's fine. And those eggs are certainly edible. There's nothing wrong with it. Also, the chicken eggs that you buy in the store, they absolutely are not fertilized. I see these stories online, I got chicken eggs at Shaw's and they were fertilized. That is impossible. These hens do not see roosters for any of their lives. They're sadly, they're factory farmed to just produce eggs, not waste time doing anything else. And they certainly they're not exposed to males to mate with, if that makes sense. If you get eggs from your friend's farm though, and they have roosters, then there's a possibility that your eggs were fertilized. So you should always be careful and double check there. I love this photo. This was a blackback gull egg, and this was a chick that was hatching. I was on an island in Maine and got to see chicks hatching there. And I love, this is my favorite quote in 47 years of my life that I've ever heard, because it's so true. I think that if required, on pain of death, to name instantly the most perfect thing in the universe, I should risk my fate on a bird's egg. I have never seen anything so perfect. And the reason I say this is, think about this. Here we have a structure, okay, an egg that is so delicate that a chick can hatch out of it, and live free in the wild. So it has to be so delicate that a chick can hatch out of it, but also so sturdy and rigid that the parents can incubate it for many days. And then it's not susceptible to bacteria and water, and fungus. It really is the most perfectly self-contained unit you can ever think of. And so what is the shell made of? Well, it's made of calcium carbonate, collagen fibers string it together, crystalline calcite. There's a protein cuticle on eggs, and that is what helps protect it from microorganisms getting in. It also helps water to get in. Eggs are okay if they get wet. They cannot sit in water, because eggshells they have micropores, thousands of them, for the chick to breathe passively when it's developing. And so if you have a nest of eggs in your potted plant outside, if it gets a little bit wet, that's okay. It just can't sit in water, because then the water will penetrate those microscopic pores. Something you should know is, in other countries where eggs are not power washed, most other countries don't refrigerate their eggs. And that's because they're not power washing them. In this country, we don't want to go to Shaw's and see eggs with poop on them and dirt on them. So they are sterilized, they're power washed, and it removes this protein cuticle. And I've just told you how important that cuticle is for the developing chick, protects them against microorganisms going into the egg. And so we remove that in the power washing process. So we have to refrigerate our eggs. But if your friend gives you chicken eggs from their backyard, you actually don't have to refrigerate them. If you store them in a cool place, they will be fine, as long as that protein cuticle has not been washed off. Another amazing thing is, when a female bird is laying eggs, nearly 12% of their bone calcium is transferred to produce that egg. Now think about that. Here is a female bird who's laying eggs. She's eating everything she can to get the proper nutrition to create this egg. There's a lot going into it. Just that nutrient-rich yolk alone is an immense metabolic demand on the body, and never mind the eggshell that then goes around it. So I like to think about this. This makes me sad when I think about birds like piping plovers, who, they often have nest failures because of storms, early spring storms. And then after they've had a nest failure, they often will nest again, but instead of laying 4 eggs, they'll lay 3. Or instead of laying 4 eggs, they'll lay 2. And that's because the reserves that it takes to produce these eggs is so huge, which is also why it's critically important that we protect, especially these threatened species, because they don't have they don't have a lot of time, and they don't necessarily have all these reserves to produce a healthy clutch that survives in the season, if that makes sense. The female transfers 12% of her own bone calcium to produce the eggshells. It's really important. Okay, so we talked about how the egg is produced in the body, and then the female lays the eggs, and then what the heck happens? Well, many species of birds, sometimes male and female, they develop what's called a brood patch. And this is what you're looking at here. Is you're looking at a bird's breast. Okay, so its head is up here. Its breast, its abdomen. Some species of birds, once they go into their egg laying condition, they start to lose feathers on their breast, and their breast and abdomen become extremely vascularized. So see how it looks like kind of like a blood blister? This is very warm and vascular. And what it does is it allows direct heat transfer to the eggs. Because imagine if you have feathers, feathers are like the best insulators on the planet. So if you're incubating against feathers, the eggs aren't getting the full effect of your body heat because the feathers are holding that in. So now they can do direct transfer of heat from the body to the eggs. Okay. And sometimes we see this in a rehab setting and we say, you know, oh my God, this bird is sitting on eggs or has young. So we need to get this bird out as soon as possible. Not all birds incubate in this way. There are many species that incubate eggs on their feet, and northern gannets are one of them. This is a northern gannet, and all of their relatives do the same. They have these huge vascular feet, so very warm feet, and they actually incubate the eggs either just under their toes or sometimes on the top of their feet, and then they can sit on top of that. When I was in Galapagos, I saw a cousin of the northern gannet, the Nazca boobies, and their toes are just over the eggs. So even with those big clumsy feet, it is direct heat transfer to the egg. Birds also have to turn the eggs frequently, and I will explain why they do that. Okay, so this is an American robin photo on the right. And now we're going to talk about how the chick actually develops in the egg. So it's important to know. So I explained how the egg is produced within the body and it comes down the oviduct and it's laid. There is no chick yet. Chicks do not develop until the female starts incubating the eggs. Okay, so that all happens, that's external. So for most species, they start incubating usually with the second to last egg because they want the chicks to hatch all at the same time. But there are some species like owls and hawks that do what's called asynchronous hatching, where they will incubate starting with the first egg, and then their chicks hatch at all different times. And that is an evolutionary strategy in the event that there is a good year where there's tons of food. Well, then all of the chicks are probably going to survive. In the event that it's a year with bad food sources, the first chicks to hatch will probably survive, but the smaller ones that hatch later will not. So that was intentional. Okay, so here's what happens. So I already told you the egg is produced, and what's in the egg is we have the yolk, we have the eggshell, we have that clear and cloudy viscous material in the egg that you see when you crack open your chicken egg. So what happens is the chick, oops, right in the center of your egg, and I encourage you all, if you eat chicken eggs, to look at your chicken egg tomorrow morning, and you're going to see a little white dot on the top of the egg. Okay, and this is called, when it's unfertilized, it's called a blastodisc. When it's fertilized, it's called a blastoderm. And from that little white spot, that is where the chick develops on top of the yolk. When you look at your chicken egg, on the sides of the yolk, you're going to see little white strings, and they're attached to the membranes on each side of the egg. This is because the parents have to continuously turn the eggs throughout the day and evening because they want heat to be distributed evenly throughout the egg. They don't want membranes to stick. They don't want the chick to stick to membranes. And so the egg has to be turned. And what this does, it acts like a coil. And because of the differences in viscosity, it allows that the chick is always on top of the yolk. So, because imagine if you roll the egg and now the chick's upside down, he's got this 10-pound yolk on top of his body. The chick needs to always be upright in the egg. And I hope that makes sense. It's because of differences in viscosity, but also there's this little, it's called a chalaza, and it's rope-like and allows the egg to turn and the yolk to continue to stay upright. Okay, and then you have all kinds of different stuff going on here. This airspace we'll talk about next. Oh, I had to include this in here. Sometimes your morning eggs smile back at you. This one looked like a dog to me, so I had to take a picture. And people ask, how can I eat eggs? I've always loved eggs, and I just hope to make the right choices and try to buy, farm raised and free range eggs when I can, and hope that the chickens had a really good life. See this little white spot? That is your blastodisc. This is where the chick arises from. See these little white strings? In the egg, they'd be pulled out. Those are the little coils. So the egg turns, and our little chick continues to stay on top of the yolk even when the egg turns. When I used to do this in person, I would actually bring eggs, and then we wouldn't waste them. I would bring them back for the patients, but I would crack eggs open so people could see this. And now you can't. So I'm really glad I took this picture so that everyone can see what it looks like. Okay, so this is the coolest and most fascinating part of this entire presentation. How the chick develops within the egg. Oops, I have a really slippery mouse. Okay, so within the egg, I don't know why it does that. Sorry about that. It looks like a little alien. This is our chick. It is growing on top of, this is the yolk. So that yolk, that is the chick's food source while it's developing in the egg. So think about this, a mallard, for example, a mallard duckling in an egg, it's in the egg for about 29 days. For the whole 29 days, it needs a food source, so it's absorbing that nutrient-rich yolk. In the meantime, the egg is very porous and vascular and has all these little dots represent like micropores. Okay. And the chick is also surrounded by those viscous white clear fluids that you see in your chicken egg. And these act very much like amniotic fluids. They keep the chick cushioned from movement. They keep temperatures stable while the chick is in the egg. Here's the other fascinating thing. So this chick is eating, it's absorbing all this food. And then how the heck does it go to the bathroom? So see this here, it's called the allantois sac. That is like an early analog of the intestines. And these will get absorbed into the body. The bird is actively pooping, and it's producing those uric acid crystals. Remember I talked about this in the beginning? So think about this. In this egg, if this bird had a bladder, that would be ammonia that would reach high levels in a very quick period of time. But also there's no water for this chick to drink to rid itself of the ammonia from urine. And so that would be just toxic environment. So instead it is pooping and passing uric acid crystals into this allantois sac, non-toxic. I also want to tell you that this chick is not breathing air with its lungs in the egg. This is very important. There is what's called passive breathing. So air and carbon dioxide is being exchanged passively through the pores in the egg. Okay, so the chick is breathing in that way. When the chick is getting ready to hatch, if you look at your chicken egg tomorrow morning, on the blunt end, there's a big airspace separated by a membrane. You've all seen this. As the chick develops, that air cell gets bigger and bigger and bigger. The chick gets bigger and the air cell gets bigger. And that's because as the chick grows, and I can't really show it, but this airspace is being pulled back, it enlarges. And when the chick is ready to hatch, the first thing they do is, we call it an internal pipping, where they puncture this airspace. And as soon as they do that, they swallow the amniotic fluid that was around their head, just like a human baby. They swallow the amniotic fluid, take a gulp, they breathe for the first time with their lungs. And this is why it's critically important. That stage is so important, especially when you're incubating eggs in a captive setting, because conditions need to be absolutely favorable so that that chick can, start that process and finish it. because then the next thing they have to do is they have to bust out of the eggshell. I may have put a quote here, maybe not, but I have read several times that the single most strenuous thing in a bird's life is hatching. And many don't survive, but many more do. But imagine being all cramped up in this egg. So here is the chick. I like this actually. It shows the yolk. They absorb this. Here's the poop sac. They absorb this. By the time they're ready to come out, they look like this, a full chick. There might be a little bit of yolk still remaining that needs to be absorbed into the gut. Okay, but for the most part, excuse me, they're just a fully contained unit. I really wish my mouse didn't do this. I don't know why it does. I lost my slide. Okay, so it pips through this internal membrane. And then what happens is about 3 days prior to hatching, they get into this hatching position, which you see here, where they tuck their head under their wing. They start bumping with their legs and they start pecking with their beak. And through all of this, you start to see, they start to fracture the eggshell like here. And by the way, if you find eggs outside and you want to know if they've hatched or not, there's never going to be a hole at the narrow side of the egg, right? Because I just explained why. The first thing they need to do is to puncture that airspace on the blunt side. So if you find a nest of eggs and, there's holes on the narrow side, that means that that nest was predated. I'll show you how the eggs should crack. And by the way, here's a good visual. This is what the airspace looks like. Blunt side of the egg. This is what they would puncture first. Okay. Here's just another visual. Here's the hatching position. And they start bumping with their legs and turning. It's pretty amazing, actually. And sorry, because this is super graphic image, but this is what a chick looks like when it develops and then when it hatches. It's just an amazing, amazing process. This is just more of the same. They fill the egg. And I just wanted to show you, I think I have pictures of what eggs look like. Basically, when eggs hatch, you'll see the top half of the blunt side popped off. And then you know that they've had a hatch and it wasn't predated. If you just see holes in the side of the egg, then that is not normal. The only time you see a little hole is when they're starting to puncture that blunt end of the eggshell. There are a few things that we do at Wildcare to determine when we get eggs, what stage of development they're in. We do candle eggs, but sometimes birds like osprey, they have really dark pigmented eggs. It's really difficult for us to see through the eggs with light. So sometimes we have to do what's called floating. And because that airspace gets larger and larger and larger throughout development, eggs will have this trend in rotation as they get closer to hatch. And so sometimes we use that to judge the age of the chick within the egg. Often it is a guessing game. It's amazing. I also want to tell you, so the chicks, that's so strenuous for them to get out of the eggshell. That final process can take, 24 hours or more to get through the internal membrane and then the external shell. So they are tired in there and they do take breaks, but they also develop this hatching muscle, which allows them to just peck away at the shell and break out. That gets absorbed into their neck. So here's an example. I keep saying pipping. See the little beak coming out of the blunt end of the egg. And then look at this. See how this is half an eggshell with the blunt end popped off? That tells me that chick hatched. That was a normal hatch. That wasn't a predation. And here's also, these are some ducklings that I hatched a few years ago. Blunt side of the egg popped off. Usually the inner membranes are turned inward. That's a sign of right here is a sign of a healthy hatch. And I say this because one day I found a mallard nest and the eggs, they had perfect holes eaten out of their sides. And I knew, sadly, it was a fox or something that went in there and they were not hatched. It's kind of cool to find eggshells and to determine, did they hatch or were they predated? And so eggshells, eggs, I've been talking about how fabulous they are, but they are also functional in so many ways. Egg shapes are also depending on genetics and the bird's lifestyles. And so, for example, a beautiful example is the common murres. We have common murres on the Pacific coast and the East Coast, and their eggs are top shaped like this. And that is because where these birds nest is on coastal cliffs. They nest in the Gulf of Maine and then further north up into Greenland. And when they're on coastal cliffs, it's a really tight space that they're nesting in. And so imagine if you're nesting on this tiny little space and there's a huge drop down to the ocean. If you bump your egg and it's the typical chicken egg shape, it is just going to roll off the cliff and you're done. So instead, they've evolved to lay eggs that are top shaped. So when these eggs turn, they actually turn in a circle so they don't roll off the cliff. I mean, it's absolutely brilliant. And then their eggs vary depending on geographic location to blend in with their surroundings, which is often like, seaweed vegetation, rotting vegetation, and their eggs are camouflaged to meet that. So it's very, very cool. Also, when eggs are shaped, this sort of top shaped, they all tuck together really nicely in a nest for a small bird so that they can incubate them all and have an even heat distribution through all of them, if that makes sense. I just want to point out a lot of cavity nesting birds like woodpeckers, they have white round eggs. And that's because they're nesting in cavities. So they don't have to worry about them rolling away. They don't have to worry about them being camouflaged, if that makes sense. So why then do birds like robins have these bright blue eggs? Well, it's thought that if you are a predator looking down, bright blue eggs they are perceived as holes in the landscape. You can't really see them, like holes in the vegetation. And so blue actually in the environment gets flushed out. It's not seen as vividly as you would think. To us, robin's egg blue is like the most vivid bird egg color we could ever think of. Here are just a few examples. I think this was a chickadee, so a cavity nester, round eggs, white eggs, no need for camouflage. This was a wren, I want to say Buick's wren, cavity nester, round eggs, a little bit of camouflage. And these were bluebird eggs. And notice these birds very close to hatch, big airspace, egg totally full. Sadly, this is when I was living in California. We had an unusual freeze with heavy rains and birds, I think there was a scarcity of food availability and these eggs did not hatch, sadly. This was part of a nest box project that I was a part of in California. An amazing set of eggs and an amazing nest and an amazing species, chimney swifts. They nest in chimneys. They favor chimneys because of lack of natural habitat, which used to be large hollow trees, caves, rocky crevices. These birds build this amazing nest on vertical surfaces and literally glue it together with their saliva, which is incredible. But look at these eggs, again, top shaped. Imagine you have this nest that's on a vertical surface, it's glued. If you knock an egg, it's going off. So they also need these top shaped eggs, which will tend to rotate in a circle if jarred instead of just rolling off. Even so, it's a very precarious nesting. And so here's some cool egg facts for you. So most species lay eggs, like I said, they produce an egg within 24 to 48 hours. However, there are some bigger bodied birds and it takes them longer to produce an egg and lay it. And that's because I told you about just the huge metabolic demands of producing an egg. If you're a larger bird, it's going to take more metabolic demands. So the ratites, birds excuse me, the ostriches and the rheas and penguins and raptors, it takes them 4 to 8 days to produce an egg. These numbers also make me sad. You know, when you hear about bird nests that have been destroyed or bird nests that have blown down, and I know how much effort these birds have put into it. Nest building for days, if not weeks, and then producing eggs for days. Boobies and hornbills, it takes them 7 days to lay an egg. Kiwis take the cake. Kiwis are the flightless birds. You think of New Zealand, beautiful flightless birds. They're very bizarre. They're nocturnal. They lay 2 ginormous 500-gram eggs at 4-week intervals. And please Google kiwi egg x-ray, and you will see a picture. You will see an x-ray of a kiwi with an egg in it, and it takes up 25% of the female's body mass. So it takes up a huge amount of space in the body. Ostriches lay enormous 1,900-gram eggs, and then hummingbirds are on the other end of the spectrum, laying eggs that weigh, I think, less than a small paperclip. I took this photo when I lived in California. I used to do California gull surveys at gull colonies that had over 20,000 gulls. That was quite life experience that I'll never forget. But I absolutely loved this nest because often gulls will put objects in their nests, and this gull had a bunch of French fries in the nest, which was awesome. You know that saying, I'm happier than a gull with a French fry? And now all birds are not the same. I mean, I just showed you that there's differences even in how long it takes to produce the eggs. So what about the different types of development? So these are Carolina wren chicks, and this is a Carolina wren. And these birds are what we refer to as altricial. So most of our baby songbirds are altricial. What I mean by that is when they hatch, they are naked, blind, and they are completely helpless. They're 100% dependent on the parents for warmth, for food. Okay. And so their development, their development into independence takes place after they hatch. And think about this. This is an American robin. The incubation period is like 12 to 14 days. And then the chicks develop in the nest for another 14 days before they leave. These are nestlings, nestling American robins. So getting a little more feathered, able to hold up their head, open their eyes, begging for food. These are the fledglings. These are the rambunctious teenagers. They're the same size as adults, fully feathered. But when they leave the nest, they actually can't fly yet. And so people kidnap them thinking they're injured. And that's when we tell people, put them back and let the parents feed them if they're not injured. I'm going to show you an example of how quickly this process is for Altricial songbirds. This is a dark-eyed junco. This is the Oregon junco. So we have dark-eyed junco here, but we have slate-colored subspecies. On the West Coast, I was working with dark-eyed junco. This was the Oregon subspecies. Beautiful nest. Look at how the eggs are camouflaged with the nest. They would use a lot of grapevine bark. So here's day 1. Chicks hatch, naked, blind, and helpless. Altricial babies. Day 2, already holding up their head, eyes open, nice and alert, sitting up. Day 3, look at the difference. Feathering coming, pin feathers erupting, more down. Look at day 4. Feathers really, pin feathers erupting. Day 5, now the feathers are starting to erupt from the sheaths. Day 7, they look like birds. Their feathers are erupting. Junkos have white outer tail feathers. I don't know if you guys can see out of these follicles. You can see the outer white feathers. This stuff helps us identify naked baby birds when they come in. So look at day 7 to day 10. Day 10, they're like fully feathered, ready to pop out of the nest, almost fully feathered. By day 12, they're gone. And so I also like to use this photo series as a reminder. When you call us and you say, there's house finches that just hatched and they're on my lamp on my deck and I don't want them there. And we say, could you wait 12 days? Because they'll be gone in 12 days. And then you can clean your lamp, block it up. It is such a quick period. I feel like we owe these birds that break. And even if they just started incubating, we're talking 12-day incubation for most species and 12 to 14 days in the nest. So a month. And I hope everything I've told you about like how metabolically expensive it is to produce eggs will make you think twice about, having to tear down a nest. Not to mention, it also is illegal to remove nests with eggs in them of migratory species. And so that means every species in North America, except for, there's a few exceptions. So this is just a late nestling of the Oregon Junco. They're so beautiful. I did rehab work on the West Coast as well. So some of these pictures are from my rehab work. Okay, so that's precocial. Songbirds, naked, blind, helpless when they hatch. Precocial, totally different ball game. So precocial refers to the waterfowl, your ducks, geese, swans, gallinaceous birds. Those are your chickens, grouse, turkey, grebes and rails, and megapodes, which we will get into later. So what happens here is these babies, they do a lot of development within their egg, so that when they hatch, they need to be like eyes open, covered in down, and ready to go. They need to leave the nest. So that mother robin, she incubates for 14 days and then hatches these blind babies. Mother mallard incubates these babies for 29 days and hatches these little babies who have eyes open, covered in down. As soon as they dry, on the day that they hatch, they follow mom. Mom does not have to feed them. The precocial birds do not, the precocial waterfowl do not have to be fed by their parents, but they need, in the case of ducklings, they need their mother for warmth and protection, and also for waterproofing. By being in direct contact with her, it rubs a lot of her preening oils onto their downy feathers and helps them to retain waterproofing. I love this photo because mallard males, they have nothing to do with the young. A female mallard will lay 10 to 12 eggs. When she's produced the second to last egg, he is out of there. Deadbeat dad, big time, leaves and has nothing to do with the eggs, the nest. She then starts incubating and then she is on her own. This is also why, the chicks need to be ready to go on the day they hatch, leave the nest and leave with her, and she'll bring them to water and bring them to safety. Oops. So the megapodes, my memory eludes me right now as to where they are located, but it's this amazing species of bird that they actually lay their eggs in these like volcanic sediment, and they allow the sediment to incubate the eggs. There is absolutely no parental care. Like if I was going to be a bird, I would want to be a megapode because I think this is awesome. So they know exactly which depth to incubate the eggs at. The male will actually come back and make sure that everything is okay at that nest. And when the chicks hatch, they are flighted. Like they come out of the ground and they are ready to go. To me, that is so bizarre. That's like aliens or dinosaurs or I don't even know what, but megapodes know where it's at. Imagine, and I think the incubation period's long because again, they need to do all their development in the egg, come out of the earth like a turtle and be on their way. They have no parents and they need to be self-sufficient. So I just talked about altricial birds and precocial birds. Big difference. Well, guess what? Then we have semiprecocial birds. This was monitored of California gulls in San Francisco Bay. Awesome. All these birds are nesting. They're sitting on eggs. This is a California gull nest. Beautiful, beautiful eggs, beautiful camouflage. Semiprecocial means they hatch, they're covered in down, their eyes are open, just like a duckling, except they're dependent on the parents to feed them. Again, the ducklings, the goslings, they just need to follow. In the case of the ducklings, they need to follow mom. In the case of the goslings, baby geese, they need to follow mom and dad, but they don't get fed. They eat on their own. These little gulls, they have down, their eyes are open, but they need to be fed. And they usually choose to stay in the nest for several days. And both parents come and brood them and feed them. So there is a degree of dependence. And it makes sense when you think about it, because gulls are hunters and scavengers, and that's going to take some time, skills to acquire, life skills. And then I talked about the altricial birds, which is the naked, blind, and helpless. And guess what? We also have semi-altricial. And these are your hawks and your owls. So when owls hatch and hawks, they have asynchronous hatching. Like I explained before, the female will incubate the eggs, starting with the first egg that's laid. So this might mean you'll have all different size chicks in the nest. And often the bigger chicks, in years where there's lots of prey, all the chicks will survive. In years where there's not as much prey, the bigger chicks will often be the ones to survive, or the oldest chicks in the nest. But so owls, when they hatch, they are covered in down, and their eyes are closed though. Often, like a great horned owl, their eyes open around day 10. Raptors, it's all different, but when they hatch, they're covered in down, eyes open. But both of these guys, they are so dependent on the parents, and it's because of the lifestyle. They need to learn how to hunt. And so a great horned owl, for example, they'll be in the nest for 8 weeks, and then they'll be fledged around 10 to 12 weeks, and the parents will continue to feed them for several weeks, because you can't just throw them out of the nest and expect them to be able to hunt rabbits and skunks and mice. It's a skill that they need to acquire. So we're talking from the day that chick hatches to the day they are independent, we're talking months. So that's semi-altricial. It's really fascinating. I absolutely love this photo. He is so adorable. Terns are semi-altricial. He must be looking, I don't know if that's mom or dad on the nest, but the chick must see mom and is like, hey, give me the grub. Where's the food? So cute. And he's standing on his tiptoes. Terns are semi-altricial. When they hatch, they're covered in down, their eyes are open, they choose to stay they're mobile, they can walk, they choose to stay at the nest for several days. Mom and dad protect them and bring them food. Terns take it another notch. All of our terns here are migratory. They migrate with the parents. The parents have to feed them. It takes so much skill to hunt. We all know how terns hunt. They have excellent vision. They hover over the water. They dive and grab fish. Imagine how much skill and how many misses they have to perfect that skill. So this little guy, he needs to actually migrate in the fall with the parents. And it's very sad. It's always a race against time for us when we get young terns at the end of the season. We try to teach them how to hunt, and then release them back out the door. We never know if they find their parents. Probably not, honestly. But we hope that we've taught them enough adequate skills that they can survive. Okay, so I think that's my egg talk. So I'm just going to I think I have just a few quick slides about what to do if you find a baby bird, whether it's precocial or altricial, or actually we're going to talk about this. We'll talk about the songbird. So if you find an orphan bird in your backyard, it's probably a songbird, and we want you to call us. And if it's injured, cat attack, dog attack, we will have you bring it in. It will need to be assessed. But, oh, I didn't include any pictures. We'll ask you a bunch of questions. So if you find that little naked, blind, and helpless baby on the ground, unless you know exactly where the nest is, we're probably going to ask you to get it warm and to bring it into us. because as you now know, it is so dependent on the parents for warmth and food, excuse me, that you can't just like stick it in a basket and hang it up and hope the parents find it. It will die. It will get hypothermic. So unless you know exactly where the nest was and you can put it back in, we're going to have you get it warm and bring it to us. Nestlings, which are the birds that, you know, they're a little bit more feathered, a little farther along in development. These guys are late nestlings. If the nest fell on the ground and you think you know where the nest was, we might have you put it in a basket, because a basket has drainage holes. You don't ever want to put baby birds in a bucket, and then if it rains, you know, the bucket's going to get flooded. We might have you put the nest in a basket, hanging in the tree where you think the nest was. Watch for the parents. If the parents come, yay. If they don't, we'll have you bring them in. The last one is, I showed you that rambunctious teenage robin. That is the most #1 kidnapped bird for wild care, and I think probably in the Northeast. Baby birds, they go through a period called a fledgling, and this is when they leave the nest, but they can't actually fly yet. Their flight feathers are not fully developed. And so the parents, if you watch closely, are usually still feeding them. And so that's when we tell people, if it's not injured, it wasn't in your cat's mouth, keep your cats away, your dog away, your kids away. Watch for the parents feeding the baby bird. If they're feeding the baby bird, that is the best possible scenario. We want you to leave it there. If they're not, then you can bring it in. But I just want you to know that most songbirds, they leave the nest and they can't actually fly, sustained flights for like sometimes 5 or more days. It's a very terrible time, high mortality for young songbirds because of this precarious period of time. Okay, so that was my talk. I know it was a ton of information and some of it may be a little bit technical, but it's just a fascinating topic. I hope you think differently about eggs and baby birds, and I hope you enjoyed the talk. I can take questions, and also you should follow us on Facebook and Instagram because we post lots of cool stuff there all the time. Actually, I have a quick video to show you. Oh, and this, I love this photo. How many legs does this bird have? This is an American avocet who is brooding his chicks, and you can see all the little legs under there. So amazing. Rebecca, I'm going to show this last slide and then a quick video, and then I will stop my screen share.
I'm just going to tell you that megapodes are in Western Pacific, Australia, New Guinea, the islands of Indonesia.
Thank you. I always forget that. They are so cool. You all should look up megapodes. They're like the weirdest animal. Just a reminder that next Wednesday on June 9th is our last talk of this series. And it is going to be, as Rebecca mentioned earlier, it's an info session and Q&A about Contrapest, which is a non-hormonal product that is available on the market for anyone. And it is basically rat contraception. And this talk is not for us to tell you to buy it because we do not endorse products. It is basically a session where you can ask questions and make informed decisions about what to use for controlling rats. I am now going to stop this share because I want to share a video with you of what an egg looks like inside when we candle it. All right, Rebecca, I'm going to try this again. Screen share. I hope this works. Can you see this video? Okay, so this was a robin egg, and this is what it looks like. And sorry, you can probably see all of this. This is what it looks like when you candle it. You can see the chick. You can see all that. I kept saying that inside the egg, it's very vascularized. There's passive breathing. You can see all sort of the vessels, see the airspace, see the chick's eye and head, and that embryo shape, sort of a tail. Isn't that amazing? It's really beautiful. It's a beautiful thing to see. And for those of you who are following our mystery egg on Facebook, unfortunately, I have sad news that the bird did not survive. For some reason, it died during the internal pipping process, and we were devastated. And our egg expert, she has seen the necropsy photos, and she doesn't understand what went wrong. Everything looked okay, but this is also the gamble that we take. You know, when people find an egg on the ground and bring it to us, we have no idea if something was wrong. Okay, so now I'm going to stop sharing and I will take questions. Thank you.
Thank you. For anyone that wants to sign up, I did just put a link for the Eventbrite for next week. It's right in the comment section, but I think everyone on here gets our emails, and I did send an email the other day with the link, and you'll be getting another one in the next 24 to 48 hours, depending on what else happens at Wildcare. It is baby season, so my emails have been a little bit delayed. Sorry.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yes, I do. Wonderful talk. I did some monitoring of the bird boxes over in Bank Street Bog for several years. So it gave me even a deeper understanding of what I was seeing there. But the question I have is I've never quite understood what happens with the chicken, that the chicken keeps laying eggs when they're not fertilized.
Yes, that's because actually I was just texting with Amy, our volunteer, the other day about this. So birds they are stimulated to lay eggs when the conditions are perfect. So that means great food sources and increased daylight, and a few other environmental factors. And so what happens is birds in the wild, if they produce blanks, let's call them, you know, evolutionarily, that would not be favored, you know, because birds, they would never have viable young because they'd waste all their resources.
Right.
But for some reason, in captive birds and chickens, they're stimulated by that photoperiod and the food sources, and they will continue to produce even though they are not fertilized, if that makes sense. I think it's because evolution did not favor that. Can't happen in the wild. Like birds can't waste that time. If they could, I believe the same thing would happen because they're stimulated by the same things. I mean, typically the increase in daylight is also what stimulates them to migrate, and their hormones, you know, their gonads increase, and then typically they're coming here because there's better food sources. So, and that's also why, sadly, a lot of factory farms, it's all hens, and they will keep their lights on 24 hours a day. These birds are so confused. It's just like produce their entire life, light and food. And I didn't mention it, but chickens also, well, birds, they tend to deposit a richer, more yellow yolk in the evening. Because a normal bird would be eating during the day, and then they have all these carotenoid pigments that are from their food that are being deposited at night. Well, the factory farmers, these birds can process all their carotenoid pigments all day in full daylight and produce that beautiful orange egg that we all love, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
It's really sad when you think about it.
Yeah, I knew something was going on that was different. So that explanation is really interesting.
Oh, good. Thank you.
I have a question to pass on. What would cause a hiatus in egg laying? It just happened to one of the plovers that I monitor. 2 eggs for 5 days until eggs 3 and 4 finally appeared.
That must be Jeanette. Hi, Jeanette. Okay, so there was a delay. I would say it was probably related to food sources. Was there a storm event or anything in
No,
between?
actually, the weather was perfectly fine. It was long, this is in North Truro. It was long before we got the bad weather this weekend. And
Yeah.
it's very bizarre because I checked the eggs every day, and on the 5th we had 2 eggs, and we didn't have 3 eggs until the 11th, and then 4 eggs on the 12th. I mean, it was just very weird. I've been monitoring piping plovers for quite a while, and I've never heard of that.
Yeah, I mean, that should not happen.
That's right.
Because that is so risky. I mean, because those first 2 could be easily predated and they're attracting attention to the nest, and then she can't incubate. Usually there's a delay related to food sources, but is this a female, do you think, who's laid every year, or is this like a new?
Well, I mean, it could be a new female, but they did finally have the 4 eggs, and they didn't start incubating 24/7 until the 12th of May.
Yeah.
So I mean, it could be a new female, or we speculated it might be a failed nest somewhere and it was going to be a 2-egg nest. And suddenly, of course, these other two showed up. I mean, the other 2 eggs. And now and they're due to hatch around the 5th of this month. They're really early.
Oh God, I wonder, I was going to say also maybe there was a failed nest attempt and then she was going to produce 2, and then I don't know, something,
Right.
she had the reserves to produce 2 more.
Well, the thing that's going to be interesting to see is if they will actually hatch 4 of those eggs.
Mm.
I'd
I don't
love
know.
to know.
Yeah, you're gonna have to keep us posted.
I will let you know. We just found a new nest today in North Truro, and it's got 3 eggs. So I'm waiting for the 2nd egg tomorrow, and we have all the copulation photographs that I took today. Felt like I was, felt like a porn thing. So we're assuming that we're gonna have the 4th egg sometime in about 30 hours or so. Sometime.
Oh my God, you're expecting.
Yeah. It's very bizarre.
I love it. Will you let me know about that nest? I think you have my email.
I do. I will let you know.
Okay, that's cool. What a weirdo. That bird, they can't waste time like that.
Even Mark Faraday said, just stop flushing them because it's probably a 2-egg nest.
Yep.
And then when they happened to be off and trading spaces one day, we suddenly saw 3 eggs, and then we saw 4. So I have no idea. I mean, I don't know anything about this.
Weird.
Well, you do now.
Yes. Fascinating.
I have a couple of questions. One, how long does a turkey incubate their eggs? And 2, how do you teach a baby tern to hunt?
So turkeys, Rebecca, can you Google this for me? I think it's between 26 and 29 days. That's a mallard. And she'll Google it and then we'll know. And then we teach the terns to hunt using live small fish in shallow pools. And so, they start diving and start picking up fish out of the water. But what we can't teach them, because they're just not receptive, is to teach them to hunt in deep water. So it's easy to pull a fish out of shallow water, but we can't teach them to hunt in deep water. So we always have that concern. It's very difficult to teach terns how to hunt, but that's how we do it, basically using like kiddie pools, and or shallow pans of water, and encouraging them to dive and grab fish. What's the incubation for turkeys?
So this says hens lay between 10 and 12 eggs during a 2-week period. Continuous incubation begins when the last egg is laid. The hen will only leave for a short period to feed and may remain on the nest for several consecutive days. Eggs will be incubated for approximately 26 to 28 days.
Wow.
Okay, so similar to mallards. So again, that's an example of precocial bird. they all hatch at once. They have to, because on that same day, they need to dry and leave the nest and follow mom. And in the case of turkeys, it's mom, another deadbeat dad, forgive me. And she has to protect them and brood them. They develop quickly. They can eat on their own, but they need to be shown where the food is. They're amazing. Turkey moms are amazing. Thanks, Catherine.
I have a question, actually.
Yes.
I have nesting chickadees and nesting cardinals, but I've noticed that my little bonded pairs are still feeding each other. Like, well, the males are feeding the females. Does that mean they have eggs, or I should still be like waiting? Like, I want to peek in there, but I don't want to interrupt anything.
This is the chickadees?
Yeah. Well, my cardinals too. The male is still feeding the female as of this morning.
That's awesome. It could mean that they're still, how long have they been in the houses?
Chickadees, just a couple of days. The cardinal, I'm not sure.
I associate that with, well, cardinals, it's like a bond strengthening, but also during courtship and copulation. And birds will copulate a lot in between the laying of all the eggs.
Okay.
Which makes me think, I can look it up after we're done with this Zoom, but I'm thinking that they may be still egg laying.
That's what I thought too. But then I was like, it might be over.
That's so cute. That's so sweet.
They're very sweet.
Oh,
They're very sweet. And our chipmunks keep interrupting them.
yes, I totally understand.
It's quite the nature show over here.
I have 2 baby mourning doves, and they are terrified of my chipmunks. They need to figure that out like really quick. The chipmunks are harmless.
Does anybody else have any questions? Okay. Well, thanks, Stephanie. This was great. I hope everybody learned a little something. I do almost every time we do this. It's very exciting. If you are interested in next Wednesday's chat, you can be on the lookout on your emails that you get from Wildcare. Then we're going to take a little bit of a summer hiatus from our educational talks, and we will be back in the fall. But also be on the lookout on June 26th. We are having our annual wild baby shower. That is going to be virtual, mostly virtual again this year. But if you'd like to drop off a gift, you will be eligible to be entered into our raffle of winning some Wildcare goodies. So be on the lookout in your emails for that as well. And hopefully we'll see you next week. If we don't, have a wonderful wild Cape Cod summer, and we will see you hopefully in person soon.
Yeah, yay.
Very excited. Everybody's vaccinated at Wildcare, so it's getting really exciting for us.
Yeah, it really is.
So, well, thank you, Stephanie. Thank you everyone for attending, and we will see you all soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Oh yeah, and I forgot I have a fox behind me. Goodbye. Bye, Catherine.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Bye, everyone. Bye, Mom.